Oogly boogly boo. Welcome, friends, to the spooky episode of the Bordeaux Show, where we talk about werewolves, witches, and wicked, wretched things that dwell in the woods. So, friends, as I've said, today we'll talk about some spooky, scary stories from the mythology of Eastern Europe and the Caucasus region, especially, because that's my part of the world and that's the stories I like to share. But we'll touch on many parts of the world, many parts of mythology, because, funny enough, werewolves, witches, wraiths, and such spooky things are a universal part of mythology. You can find shape changers, people who like to curse others, or some ghostly and ghoulish things that dwell outside of the city or in the wrecked or abandoned parts of the world, across all of world mythology. And of course, my part of the world, Eastern Europe, especially Caucasus and the Black Sea area, such as the Balkans and the Eastern Europe, all this part of the world, is no exception. Well, stories from the ancient Stone Age come to the modern age. I believe those stories about werewolves, shape changing, beast man, all of that go back to the way past of humanity, where we were part of nature and were but one of the cycle of life. And bears, wolves, monstrous creatures were constantly a threat to us. So we lived in part of nature. So every day was a survival, and we would often pray to those totems of animals for strength, for survival, and for their mercy to let us live for one more day. And those stories and those mythology continued, transformed, and even continues into the modern pop culture with stories about the vampires and werewolves and witches and warlocks in folklore, in movies, in games, and many other fun stories that we all love, especially me as well, because I've been obsessed. I've been obsessed with werewolves, especially since childhood. Wolves were my favorite animal, and I desperately wanted to be one. I had dreams of running in the woods as a wolf, jumping through the bushes, hunting, and when I would get mad, I would imagine myself turning into a werewolf with big fangs and teeth and tearing my enemies to sunder. And then I would get scared because I'm also a good Christian boy, and I would be like, why do I have those thoughts of crushing and eating and devouring my foes? And then I went in and learned as much as I could about mythology, world mythology, and as much as I could learn about my own folklore from my own country, which is really difficult because access to the books like this is really hard to get. And most of them are either meant for little children or really high academic texts, which is not easy for a child to get into. But I came across, or I was like about 10, 12, 13. I came across a book called The Red Wolf, and that changed my life. There was life before Red Wolf, and there was life after Red Wolf. Red Wolf, unfortunately, to my Western audience, is inaccessible. Hopefully, one day we will translate it, and hopefully, God willing, I can adapt the story into a movie or a TV show or some sort of project, because it really reshaped my neural chemistry, and it really inspired. It was actually written by Goderzi Chokheli, a famous Georgian writer who passed away when I was a little kid. Fun fact, I actually kind of sort of knew him because he was a friend of my family. He was from the mountainous part of Georgia, and so is my mother's side of the family, and they had a lot of connections with them. My grandfather played in his movies. He was a movie writer first, script writer first, and went into writing a lot of dramas, a lot of mixing of those, like modern horror mixed with old pagan Georgian traditions, because the unique thing about Georgia, especially Georgian highlands, all of those ancient customs and traditions are alive. Most of world paganism and those kinds of things are more of a revival and have really little to do with the original stories and original folk belief beyond some surface level things. But in the mountains, all of these traditions and all of these stories actively survived, not just as old tales, but living part of the stories. Reading those texts written down in 19th and 20th century, unfortunately, quite recently compared to other folklore writers going into like 17th, 18th century, all of those stories about werewolves, about witches, about possessions, about evil spirits, about ghosts and vicious and friendly warlocks, and all those stories were not just something that happened in the past or in another world or 9 mountains over, as it's usually on the low parts of Georgia, but in highlands, it was part of reality. It was part of daily life. It's something that happened to your neighbor. It's something that happened to yourself. And reading that old story, The Red Wolf, really affected me, because first I thought it was just the writer's imaginations, but when I actually started learning folklore, I realized that most of the stories presented in the book were literally either one to one or 80% to 70% accurately translated and narrativized from those actual human accounts. So it wasn't like stories heard or passed down from generations. It was active stories. Someone's mother was accused of being a witch. Someone's neighbor turned out to be a werewolf. Someone actually got lost in the woods and accidentally came across a witch's coven doing a nasty ritual. So all of this magical, fantastical world was not something that happened to the ancestors or in the other world or in the dreaming world. It happened right here and right now. And that really affected me, knowing that just quite recently, maybe like less than 100 years ago, somewhat now today, but Soviet Union really cracked down on it. One of the unique things I also want to mention about the book Red Wolf is that one half of it, or the first half of it, is basically almost autobiographical of the author, coming from the mountainous village where it's a magical dreaming world where werewolves and witches are your biggest concern, and coming down into like Soviet Georgia and finding out there are worse things like taxi drivers who get paid by police officers to bring innocent people in for questioning, so that they get like more work to do, or organized crime literally living life and acting worse than wolves and werewolves in the mountains. So all of that comparison between the real world, where monsters were regular people in everyday life, so you can't even tell, you can't even like put silver or iron cross in front of them so they would scatter and flee. They were regular people, and regular humans were much more vicious monsters than even witches that were in pacts with the devils and demons and went out to harm humans. That's a unique aspect that as a child I might not have gotten as much, but rereading it now, it really is a deep story, and I am really saddened that I couldn't discuss the writings with the author of the book, because he passed away from depression and mental illness, and kinda that is also evident because it's really interesting to think about how mental illness would have shown up as in a magical world, magically thinking world. We live in more of a fact-based science world where everything has to be literal, and everything has to be like medically diagnosed. And how would those like overactive imagination, for example, that I had, that I would actually dream of being a wolf, for example, if I was in the mountains, if I was born a century before, or not even century before, from my grandfather's or my parents' generation, growing up in the mountains, would I be like hunted down as a witch or a werewolf for actually having those dreams and having those ideations and fixations of actually becoming a werewolf? Or could I have actually gone into the woods and made a pact with the wild ones and actually become a werewolf myself? That's such an interesting idea, especially for someone who was raised in Soviet commie blocks, most removed from nature, from its wildness, from its beauty, and from its terror. That's the most interesting aspect of the werewolf and witch mythology and all those like spooky stories. That it's a battle and competition between the wild side of the world and civilized part of the world. Civilized part of the world is the village, is the city, is the dwelling of humans, and the woods and the mountains and the caverns and the underworld and the heavens. All of that existed in the wild, beyond human settlement and beyond human connection. And there is where some humans went and became werewolves, some humans went and became witches, and many people's spirits dwelled and became mad and turned into wraiths and evil ghosts that haunted societies. It's really fascinating, especially considering that all of the stories that I'm reading were living stories by the people who actively kept their ancient traditions alive that go back thousands and thousands of years. I'm not exaggerating when I say all of those stories and all of these myths that were written down in 19th and early 20th century were actually continuation of the ancient, even Bronze Age and even Stone Age stories, because we have stone carvings and Bronze Age and Iron Age artifacts that actually repeat the symbols and motifs of those stories. That's how deep it goes. But of course, after, from centuries and centuries, telling and retelling, grandmas and grandpas telling their little grandkids those stories, of course, through language and through influence, everything changes, but still the line gets unbroken. That's the thread that continues from generation up to generation up to generation, came to this the part of time and part of space of early and middle of 20th century. But unfortunately, to my generation, it's beginning, the threads beginning to unravel and break, and that's my hope, to somehow tie those knots back together and continue threading the needle and continue threading the and spinning the wool to make more thread, basically. And my metaphor kind of escaped me at the end, which is which is we have stories of werewolves or witches in our culture. We have many names. I've written some of them down. I couldn't remember all of them. There is, of course, the typical name of the witches, which is da, 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 da. Mahriari, or typical old grandma, like hags that live in the woods in their huts and do like evil magic. Those are mahre, but mahre can be good, but typical mahre is evil. So a good mahre has to be pointed out, because mahre is like an evil, angry old person, old woman especially. There can be males, but usually those like witches, stereotypically, again, in Georgian and Caucasian culture, in the Balkans, Eastern Europe, and Europe in general, and also not just Europe, the world in general, are more associated with women. But there are men who participate in magic too, of course. And Avkari is another word. Jazzy, like, do you like jazz? Jazzy is another word. Okay, and Khibal Kudiani. Kudiani is the typical name. Khibal Kudiani is much longer title. Kudiani, again, connects back to werewolves, is someone with a tail. one of the distinguishing features, unique distinguishing features, but you may find it in other parts of Europe as well, is that witches have tails. And that's the remnant of them transforming and shapeshifting into animals. That's also the Georgian name for werewolf is Magtsia, and Magtsia has many theoretical origins. Like Magtsi is a Svan mountain, another mountain Georgian tribe or clan or people or nation or whatever you want to call them. Svan name for wolf, and they also have a god of wolves called Mamberi. Mamberi is the god of wolves, and there are a lot of surviving stories of hunters going into the woods and going into the wilderness and meeting shapeshifters, shape changers, hunter goddesses, and forest spirits who can actually bestow the gift of shape changing or curse them into turning them into animals, or they themselves also have the ability to shape change. That's one of the most common trope for a magical being, especially those without flesh. They can appear as anything you can imagine. But I distinguish between like non-physical beings being able to appear as an illusion, as their form, as anything they please, from actual flesh and blood transforming, like skin changers, taking on felts of animals and turning into like some sort of a beast, you know. That's also an ancient motif in mythology, even going back to Proto-Indo-Europeans that again go back to the Caucasus Mountains. I always want to point out that a lot of the world mythology, Georgian culture and Georgian language and Georgian mythology isn't Indo-European. It predates it, and our ancestors, Caucasian hunter-gatherers, who make up most of the ancestry of Georgians with Anatolian farmers, actually were integral into creating the culture and identity of Proto-Indo-Europeans in the North Caucasus Mountains, some even think in South Caucasus Mountains. So a lot of those cultural pot of brewing of those ideas, of those myths, also come back here. And similarly, the idea of, I always knew that, now, why am I blanking right now? The Koikos, if I'm not mistaken. A similar idea being the berserkers, the ones with animal skins, the warriors with animal skins that go into trance, some sort of a mental state of actually becoming like animals and doing like shamanistic dances and shamanistic rituals, eating some sort of mushroom or some sort of a concoction brew that changes their mind state and actually, according to the stories, changes them into animals, or lets spirits of animals possess them and give them power and make them into berserking warriors. Ooh! Hopefully I'm not waking up my neighbors, because it's middle of the night, as it should be. So again, as you can tell, this is my favorite subject, and I'm very excited talking about berserkers and werewolves. And actually, interestingly, going back to the Caucasus, the oldest depictions, I theorize, that's a controversial topic about this, of this either tailed ones, the witches in our language. Again, there are many different terms for witches in Georgian. The most common being kudiani, the tailed ones, and werewolves and shape-changing being one of their main traits, goes back to my favorite archaeological find from Trialeti culture, which is Bronze Age period, and they were late Bronze Age period, if I'm not mistaken, middle to late, and they were thought to be either Indo-European settlers or mix of Caucasian and Proto-Indo-Europeans were Caucasian, like local Georgian and Indo-European cultures mixing, because they were found in organs, and organs are kurgans, as you Westerners and Americans call it. Kurgans were the burial sites of the Indo-European chieftains, but again, other cultures also did something like that. So it's a controversial topic. So some of the burials, genetic testing said they were more Proto-Indo-European. Some of them were local. Some of them were mixed. I think it's mix of both. The silver cup, oh, I love it so much. Every time I go to the museum, I always make sure to see it, and I always sometimes just open it in my phone and see it. It's a beautiful silver cup depicting bunch of ritualistic, like there's a magic tree, bunch of magical items, weapons, tools, and procession of masked, or I think they depict werewolves or shape changers or shapeshifters as it's called in Georgian, or kudiani, the tailed ones, because they distinctly have tails and snouts. It's not like big noses like some Armenian similar silver cups have big nose people depicted. That actually have like snouts and tails, and they are holding silver cups and presenting it to their leader, to their ritualistic leader, and it's a you can call it a witch's coven, you can call it some sort of a ritual before battle or after battle, but it's one of the most striking images. And again, speaking of Armenians, there is a similar silver cup found in Armenia, where Armenians are again mix of Caucasians, but Indo-European language family and Indo-European culture that came into it. So they also have this similar cup found in their culture, which is a bit more complex, depicting different scenes of severed heads, of weapons, of ritual sacrifices or beheading someone. And there's actually, I think, there is distinction between people with tails and people without tails. And people with tails are sacrificing people without tails. If I'm not if I'm remembering all of this uh, well enough. So this ritual of werewolf, witches, of shape changers, of berserkers, of koikos. Is it koikos or kovni? I don't remember. The like wolf warriors, people who go into the wilderness, kill an animal, and take their skin and try to live as a beast in the wilderness, so they can initiate and become part of that ritualistic warrior culture. And again, connection between werewolves and wolves and Georgia continues because Persian name for Georgia and a lot of influences for the name comes from is Gurjistan. Gurjistan means Gurj means wolf, and it's a land of wolves. And there is a famous king, Georgian king, called Vakhtang Gorgasal, Gurj Asal, which means Vakhtang the wolf-headed. He had a helmet that depicted wolf and lion on it, and he became like a powerful king, one of the oldest, like 5th century king of unified Georgia, who built the city that I live in, Tbilisi. And a lot of stories go back to him being a giant with a wolf's head. And I want to really promote Caucasus as Georgia as the homeland of werewolves. I know Balkans have become associated with vampires. Actually, to be honest, Balkans have more stories about werewolves and witches than they have about vampires. There is vampires themselves are more of a modern creation of Bram Stoker and other stories than actual original. Original is closer to werewolf shape changes and undead restless spirits who possess their body and come back to uh, feed on the energy of the living, and that kind of formed into werewolf mythology. But again, werewolf should be Caucasus, and Balkan should be vampire country, and separated by the Black Sea. This part of the world is vampires, this part of the world is werewolves, and they have like secret underworld shadow battles between. Because I've looked far and wide and deep and in Georgian folklore, there is no bloodsuckers in our culture. There are a lot of creatures that eat humans, but not a lot of bloodsuckers. There are some, but they don't fit that vampire framework. We could, if I wanted to, I could frame around and work around and turn some of those lesser known mythological creatures from Georgian folklore into like some subclass of vampires. But again, I'd rather this part of the world be the central hub of werewolves, where our uh, warriors of Gaia, wolves, and creatures who turn into animals dominated this part of the world, and do not let vampires in to like spread their power. And speaking of shape changes, to like round out the story, werewolves and people with wolf traits, they're not like, they're really core part of our mythology, but there are also other creatures like were-cats or were-foxes. So it's not limited by, the werewolves are the most dominant and most famous, of course, and most scary. But were-cats and other were-creatures are also prominent. Again, going back to the witches who work in the woods to undermine the civilized society, they have spies and soldiers. Werewolves, people who turn into wolves, they're like their dispatch soldiers. They're the hunters and criminals and sinners and bandits who went into the woods and were corrupted and taken by the woods to become their soldiers, to hunt and fight humans with human intelligence, but now turn into wolves and wolf carnate abilities. But they also have spies in civilized society. Spies, people who, especially women, who dwell in the cities, dwell in the villages, and give information and work as spies. And many of them shape change into cats. I don't want to be stereotypical, but most boys turn into wolves and most girls turn into cats. But there are some who also can change into wolves as well. It's not just boys' club, but it's presented like that in some stories. But oh my god, the evil has spoken. This mask is made by my friend Shota, the mask maker, another Georgian artist, and I'll get to him later. The leader of the shadow world. So, before we get into the leaderhood and the structure of the wild side of the society, I want to talk about witches more. So, let's put werewolves on the side, now go into witches. Again, as I mentioned, there are many, many, many different types of witches, but many of them share the general structure from the world perception of witches. And that's really interesting that a lot of the cultural elements that are present in Georgia is present in Eastern Europe, is present in all of Europe, is present in Eurasia, Africa, and Americas as well. So either it's something inherent in our nature and inherent in our psychology that those kind of narratives repeat, or it's such an ancient myth and such an ancient tradition that it dates back to when humans were single group, and when they spread across the world, they kept the fear and the reverence and kind of respect but hatred towards witches. That's the the culture continues of sometimes being respected but always being feared. You have witches and shape changers and shapeshifters in Americas. I'm reminded by the Twilight, Native American werewolves, but technically skin changers, and all those stories. Of course, there are many stories in England, in Ireland, and many stories in Africa. There's still, unfortunately, a lot of witch culture and anti-witch culture. Okay, like anti-witch crusades and witch burnings, unfortunately. And of course, it goes back to Asia as well, other parts of the world. And one of the oldest laws, actually, that we have surviving, of course, is the Hammurabi law, and it talks about one of the ways to determine who is a witch, how to punish them, and what punishment they might receive. And the tradition of dunking witches in the water goes back from there, might even be even older. Like dunking witches in water is not something medieval witch finders invented. It goes back even further. But again, to point out, witch finders, Inquisition, crusades, that's Western Europe. Eastern Europe, we didn't do that shit. Were they people going out and the hunting for witches? Yes, but it was secular and it was sporadic, and there was no like professional witch finders. Okay, there were, but there weren't. I'll explain later when I get to it. So the idea and the fear of witches goes back centuries upon thousands and thousands of years. I think it goes back to the, as I mentioned, with the werewolves, to totemic, nature oriented society where humans were hunter gatherers. They lived in a nature, part of the natural cycle. So the shamanic class, we see that every society of humans, even those that still somehow live in those primitive hunter-gatherer ways. I don't want to diminish the hunter-gatherer ways by calling it primitive, but you get what I mean, you know. Don't come after me. The woke hunter-gatherers, please don't come after me. So even those societies have, they might not have a chieftain as someone, one person who leads them, but they usually have a witch doctor or a shaman or a spirit medium, someone who connects to the nature. Every human, other than modern atheists, believe that everything has life, and there should be communion with it, and nature should be appeased and worked with, and it can benefit you or it can curse you. So there were the shamans, there were people whose job it was to communicate with nature, to communicate with gods, and to communicate with dead spirits and the underworld. So most distinctions between witches and spirit mediums and all that goes back into the three fields. I would also add fortune tellers and someone who can predict the future, who can curse, who can this and that. But all of those are skills that all of those witches hold, because that is the three realm that every culture and every society have. Sometimes one of those realms is diminished and ignored to the detriment of the society, but it's usually the heavens where it's above and where the gods dwell, the underworld beneath where death, destruction, curses, evil, and demons dwell, and the middle part of the world, which unfortunately Christianity, modern Christianity, mind you, kind of ignores. It's the natural world, the spirits of nature, the fae folk, for example. So there are angels, demons, and fae folks in between. Most people nowadays, especially since, you can say from the late Middle Ages to the early modern period and a modern period, even Christian church diminished the presence of the middle part, the natural world, and condemned all fae and all nature spirits into the box labeled everything evil, demonic, and pagan, and only made duality in society exist. So heaven and the hellish forces. So from that perception, all witches are evil, because all witches commune with either spirits of nature, spirits of underworld, or spirits of heaven. But those that commune with spirits of heaven and are part of the church, they are also considered to be witches. Basically, everything that is not part of the authorized church is either a witch or a warlock or a pagan or a heathen. Doesn't matter. Only the church and its structure is allowed to determine the communion with spirits and nature and the forces beyond. So, as I mentioned, there are three forces: heaven, the natural, and the underworld. Heaven is portrayed always to be good, just, and the force of morality, and where God, the Creator, the masculine, the Heavenly Father dwells. That is evident in Christianity and pre-Christian Zoroastrianism that was dominant in the region. But I believe that it didn't come from either Christianity or Zoroastrianism. There was similar ideas in the culture as well, especially in the high mountain societies where agriculture, which is the dominion of nature and the women, is less more diminished and less powerful, and shepherds and blacksmiths and warriors and the mountain culture is more masculine and connected to the heavenly Father. Especially when you're a mountain, you're much closer to the skies and the heavens. And in the mountain cultures, everything good is associated with masculinity and manhood, and everything evil and subversive and dangerous is associated with women. So all the witches are women. Not all of them, but most of them are considered to be women. It's actually reading about the stories, it's really patriarchal that if a witch is a man, it can be a beneficial for the family, because they are still men and they would think about their household more and benefit them. But if a witch is found in your family, it's a curse, because that woman would do would as the stories go, the women in your society who are witches, they will only always harm their family and their children. So that's sexism even in witches as well. But in lower societies, in the agricultural societies, the lowlands, actual matriarchal society is more powerful, and we see a lot of female figures, like female goddesses, to be more powerful, like goddess Nana. I've talked about her many times before, who is the goddess of nature, motherhood, and life, and fire, and everything that is good. And the sun goddess is Barbale, and the sun disco. Wait, let me get my sun disco out. I often mention this. Sun disco right here is associated with sun priests who are all female, and we have many grave sites of beautiful sun discos. And this is where I believe Greeks got the idea of our royal families, especially in Colchis, that the culture they met. The Colchians were a descendant of Helios. Of course, to Greeks, Caucasus and Colchis was the most eastern part of the world, and that's where the sun rose in their understanding of the cosmology. And this is where the Titan Helios, with his chariot, would spend his night and then come over and take the sun over the sky. That goes into the royal family of the Colchian society, which is Aeetes, our king, and he had multiple brothers who were kings of different parts of the Black Sea area. And he had, of course, the famous daughter Medea, founder of medicine, one of the most powerful witches in Greek mythology. But the other most powerful witches in Greek mythology were also part of the Colchian royal family. That were Pasiphae, the sister of King Aeetes and wife of King Minos of Minoan civilization, and mother of the Minotaur. As you can tell with me as well, Minotaur is actually half bull, half Georgian. He was Georgian on his mother's side. So, mother of the Minotaur, and also mother of Ariadne and many of Minoan heroes. So she's the mother of monsters, maidens, and heroes. So she's the symbolic mother. So Medea is the perpetual maiden, because she was kidnapped as a maiden, as a princess, and when she had children, she had to unfortunately kill those children, according to some Greek stories, it's still dubious in our perception. Um, so she sacrificed her children, thus remaining a perpetual maiden. And her aunt, her father's sister, Pasipae, she was the symbol of motherhood. She gave birth to monsters, she gave birth to princesses, and she gave birth to heroes as well. And she's also a powerful witch on her own, and the King Minos and the Pasiphae would often fight. She would sometimes curse him to come frogs and snakes and bugs. That's one of the worst curses you can ever get. And basically, she is a powerful witch on her own. But the most powerful witch is Circe, or Kirke in Georgian. Kirke or Circe, she is the witch that Jason and Medea go to, so Jason, the Medea and Jason can be absolved of their sins and get her blessing. She is the witch that turned Odysseus's crew into pigs, and she comes often as high priestess of, or even daughter of Hecate, the goddess of night, goddess of the underworld, and the goddess of witches and magic. Hecate, in some versions, is the mother of the family of Colchian royals. In some versions, it's a ocean nymph. In some versions, it's a human. But in some versions that I prefer, our royal family, the Colchian royal family, King Aeetes, Medea, Pasiphae, and Kirke, and the other members of the family that I don't remember their names. Those are less important. They are children of Helios, god of the sun, and Hecate, the goddess of night and magic. So, children of night and the sun. So it's such an interesting combination. But here I want to point out that yes, these are Greek myths about Georgian Colchis, Bronze Age Georgia, which is Colchis. But here we see the prime, the spiritual framework of witches, which is their holy triad, mother, maiden, and crone. No, sorry, maiden, mother, and crone. That's the proper hierarchy. Maiden is the young woman, mother is the middle, and the crone is the eldest. And that's of course representing the generations, basically your sister, your mother, and your grandmother. So that's the female hierarchy that continues over generation, and the spinning of thread is connected, of course, through magic, and it's always three spirits spinning the fates. The similar myths exist in Georgia as well. I am blanking on their name, but they are also goddesses of fate who spin the thread, like Moria or Moray, if I'm not mistaken, and similar stories exist, of course, in Scandinavia as well and other parts of the European world. So that's the practice of it. Goes back to the female work. Females were the ones who spun thread and made clothing and produced household objects and household needs. And through the spinning process, because it takes three people to spin, or even more, one person can do it as well, but it's better to work together as family. So grandmother, mother, and grandchild would work together and tell stories and gossip, of course. That's and share their ideas, and they would conspire with one another. Of course, I don't want to judge women too much, but I also want to appreciate that the culture of female gossiping is a powerful tool, especially in a village, to determine who will marry who is going to inherit, and what stories and what ways are they going to raise children. I really want to appreciate and bring forth the power and structure that women had in society, especially nowadays with modern feminism really decrying all of human past. The role and the status of women sometimes are either played completely differently, or played down, like actual women's roles in society are considered somehow negative, and more appreciation is given to women who take on more masculine roles, like warriors or rulers or conquerors or pirates or some violent male activity. When women is in the male dominated fields, that is given more leeway, and actual women's work and women's role in society unfortunately gets as seen as negative traits, like homemaking and taking care of society, telling those stories. A lot of those myths and legends are survived through the grandmothers, mothers, and grandchildren, all of them sharing their stories. When the grandchild becomes grandmother, she passes down those stories. The link and the connection between women should not be undermined and lost, because, again, it goes back way, way, way back to the matriarchal cult of the old, where women were considered. Some theories there are there are some theories that say that no Stone Age or even Neolithic societies weren't matriarchal, but we still, again, as I've shown with the sun priestesses, there were sun priestesses, and sun worship and nature worship was connected to women's role. Again, Minoan civilization, Colchian civilization, all of them were female dominated. Of course, male had their warriors and the blacksmiths and their dominant role as well, but women were also in high regard in society. After more patriarchal Indo-Europeans come, women's role is neglected. That's I'm going somewhere with this. And the women's role in societies of being priestesses and being powerful sorceresses of the society, medicine women, healers, leaders of community, those who held stories and passed those stories down. When Indo-European warrior Aryan culture comes in, women are basically enslaved, and previous cultures, men are basically killed. And the more Aryan, masculine, patriarchal, sky god dominated worldview is imposed in those societies. But it still survives in small occult ways. So the dominant matriarchal priestesses now are sidelined by patriarchal priest by patriarchal priestly class, and women are regarded as either servants or like in special delegated roles, and their womanly powers, let's just say, I don't know how crass I want to be. Basically, women priests are now regarded only as virgins. Their sexual female power is taken away in the priestly pursuits. That is evident, for example, in, again, Minotaur. The story of woman lying with a bull is not just horrible. Oh my God, she was so terrible for doing it. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depends on your perception, that was also part of the agricultural ritual. Let's just say that. So it's evident in the story of founding of Minoan civilization. Before Minotaur, we had Europa being kidnapped by Zeus, who turned into a bull and impregnated her as a bull and gave birth to King Minos. And it's a kind of twist of fate that his own wife gets impregnated by another bull, and basically he gets cucked by Poseidon's bull now. So this motif of bull with bull ex woman kind of relationship goes back to that agricultural ritual, because female fertility and bull fertility, because bull is also associated with agriculture as the main power that plows the field. Okay, I might be stuck in the Bronze Ages with the stories. Let's continue with the timeline. So when Indo-European culture comes in, as I've stated, they're more sky deity oriented. Sky father, earth mother is put aside. You can even see it in the stories of Greek mythology. First it's Gaia, the mother earth, then sky father, who she gives birth to, dominates her and rapes her and assaults her many times. Then a new generation of gods, the Titans, come in and castrate their father to become the new ruling class. And then the Olympic gods also rebel and kill the Titan ruling class and become the new ruling class. And then basically, like generation and generation and generation. So in those stories, we can tell that previously it was Mother Earth that was ruling society, the main rulers. You can also see in Babylonian myths that Tiamat, the dragon primordial water, she is also a female mother who gives birth to the world and a lot of the monsters and the gods as well. And you can also tell in Georgian folklore as well, there is this Veshapi mother, the mother Veshap, the Leviathan, the sea witch that dwells in the Black Sea, that gives birth to all the dragons and the whales and all the monsters that dwell in the underwaters. But okay, jumping around, one of the unique things about my culture, Georgian culture, is that Indo-Europeans couldn't dominate us. We had really powerful Indo-European warrior societies constantly invading. From the northern steppes, Scythians and Iranian tribes. From the south, we have many like Middle Eastern empires coming to conquer us. Well, from the west, we had the Greeks and then Romans, and from the southeast, we had Persians coming in. So, like, we were constantly with the battle. So, I would say south would be less Indo-European, more Semitic cultures like Babylon and would Assyrians be okay? It's not history video; it's mythology video. So even though so many different empires with more patriarchal structures come in, local culture still remains and a lot of the elements of matriarchal culture survives. But again, the best surviving versions of mythology are from mountain societies that are more patriarchal. So we get like few information about lowland agricultural societies. That's why I had to use Greek mythology as an example of Georgian myths because we don't have a lot of surviving stories. But we have plenty of hunters' myths. Hunters were the ones who kept a lot of those old traditions because they were the ones who journeyed into the woods to bring back their loot and the animals they hunted. So they kept a lot of those old hunter-gatherer and pre-agricultural societal roots, especially worship of wild goddesses, wild goddess or goddesses. It's a controversial topic because I believe there are multiple goddesses, and because in one of the stories one of those goddesses dies, and if she died, how does she appear so many times to sexually assault so many hunters? Basically, that's mostly what she does. So basically, there is this idea in there is this goddess in Georgian pantheon called Dali. She is the shepherd of the wild animals and the goddess of hunters. Someone could say, oh, she's like Artemis, but no. Artemis is a virgin and she has her gal pals and gal squads she hangs out with. And Dali is a a woman, like beautiful golden or white or red hair with flowing, beautiful white clothes. She's like an elf queen in one of those, let's say, spicy Japanese cartoons. She's well endowed and she's out to find the most beautiful and most worthy hunter and make a pact with him. So she would give him the best hunt and the most healthy ram or deer to hunt. In return, he must give all his devotion to her. So But often those hunters scorn their woodland wife, or get a new wife in the city, or they have an evil witch wife who comes and cuts her hair. That's another complicated narrative. So that is a beautiful and complicated world of like wild queen. One of her variants in other part of the Georgia, she's called Tashmapa. Tashmapa. It's a really complicated word. I know. Dali sounds more appealing now. So Tashmapa is Megrelian version of this goddess. Dali is Svan, again, Western Highland Georgia. Um, Ashmapa is more of a swampy river and lowland part of Georgia, where my father's side of the family is from. And Ashmapa means forest king. Again, in Georgian, both women and men can be kings because, again, ancient Stone Age roots of matriarchal and patriarchal cultures coexisting together. So she is the king of the wilderness, and she benefits a lot of the hunters. Again, similarly, makes lovers out of them. If they scorn her, she will kill them, send a werewolf or a beast after them. But there is also another narrative, again, another reason for me to wear this horned hat, going back to the story of Minotaur that prowls in the dungeon. This creature called Ochokochi, which means goat man or ram man, which is a half human with horns and animal or bovine features. Some stories depict him as a wild man in thick fur coat with horns coming out of his head, and a horn coming out of his chest. That's one of the most important depictions. He has a the big axe in his chest. Is it a bony growth? Some say it's a bony growth like a horn. In other versions, it's a axe stuck in his chest by some other woodsman or a hunter who was fighting him, and it's forever stuck in his chest. And then he, I don't know, gores someone who he fights, so a lot of hunters might get hugged to death by his chest horn. So he's also prowling the woods and trying to find Kashmapa, and do some horrible things to her. That's the interesting idea with this story that might be similar to the Minotaur myth of this like prowling beast that you have to find and defeat, and then get the chance to find a beautiful princess in the end, princess of the woods. So this also beast man, Ochokochi, is connected to the old pagan tradition of a animal god, as as I mentioned with werewolves, totems that slowly gain more human characteristics and then become fully humanized with some animal elements. The best example of this would be Pan. Pan is a goat man who is also a shepherd of the wild and a wild spirit who likes to have fun, drink, and represents human bestial elements. And Pan is also connected to Hermes and Dionysus. Dionysus is also famous for his horns. And both of them are traveling gods, especially Dionysus, who actually comes from the east. I claim Dionysus. I believe Dionysus is a Georgian or Anatolian with Georgian elements mix that went into Greece, because wine culture, that Dionysus is, of course, the god of wine and mad revelry, is again connected to Georgian Caucasus, and we have a similar god, Aguna, who also has horns, and we also have a similar figure to Pan, which is Ochopintre. Ochopintre is a fusion of Pochi, Ocho, and Pintre, Pan. So it's like Greco-Roman influence version of this old figure, which is Bochi is an old fertility god of nature and harvest. And one of those stories say that the Ochopindre taught the first man how to make wine to breed chaos, but man used it for good. So of course, not every man, and that's also connected to the origin. So the goat man teaches man how to make wine, and that's the connection to the goat man symbol, Pan, and not just Pan, the Dionysus. So again, I'm jumping around, going back to the witches because Dionysian cult was a mystery cult. I'm finally wrapping it back to the witches. Dionysus had a secretive cult, Dionysian cult, where a lot of women and slaves and social rejects from the Greek Hellenistic patriarchal Indo-European culture would go into the woods and practice debauchery, practice free love, free sex, getting drunk and being in mad revelry. Sorry, my nose is itchy. And in those processes, they would go outside of the community so they wouldn't be seen by patriarchs of their community. And often, if some men would dare and venture into the woods to see what their sisters, wives, and mothers were doing, Pan or Dionysus would drive them mad to kill them. And a lot of stories have that narrative of women and some socially outcast men that go into the woods, going outside of the civilized part of the world, and go outside of the patriarchal hierarchy. Trust me, guys, I'm not woke, but in this video, talking about witches, I can be a little bit wokey. So it was an escape from the dominant hierarchy that came from the Indo-European culture and reverting back to the matriarchal cult of revelry of nature. But again, Dionysus himself is a patriarchal god that still appreciates women. So I believe, going back to the witches and its forms, fear of witches was always present in society, especially when we consider that everyone believed in the underworld, every culture believed in ghosts, evil spirits, demons, and existence of magic. So if magic exists and some curses exist, evil spirits exist, someone can manipulate them for their benefit and against me. So again, as I mentioned, from the Hammurabi laws, we have many accounts how to find those witches and how to punish them, and those ideas continued. And going back to the previous agriculture and Neolithic and agricultural societies, women had more powerful priestly class role that later men took over and the women were pushed out. I believe there was some sort of a mixture and fusion of those ideas where a lot of old nature and spirit connection and shamanic rituals survived as a mystery cult that some women kept going through, not as large scale as it was previously, but as a story passed down from generation to generation, knowledge about herbs, about medicine, about some rituals, about some magical incantations to protect their family, to protect their flock, and also ideas of jealousy, about ideas of fear, of some, trying to blame something that cannot be explained in your society and finding culprits because we're human, we're always trying to find someone or something to blame. I especially always try to blame myself. I did something bad, oh, and something bad happened to me. Oh, it's because I didn't wash my hands in the morning, that's why it's raining. I don't know. So we humans always try to rationalize everything that we understand and we don't understand. So the practice of curses, practice of communion with dead, practice of communion with the witches and demons and negative spirits existed in world culture, but it was not as divided like this is the good, this is the bad. It was like mix and like it. The old the pagan religions were more mixed and mashed, and it wasn't like defined. These guys are good, these gods are good, these gods are bad. All gods can be good and bad depending on their mood and the amount of sacrifice and care that you give them. But later came, for example, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, came Christianity, and different faiths. Not to mention all the other faiths also had the idea of like anti-gods and evil spirits and demons. Uh, and there were like classes of priests were heavily divided now. There are those who worshipped good and God, and everyone else worships evil and is evil, and um, they commune with devil, and now the perception is like only good or only evil, nothing in between. But previous rituals, previous traditions had a lot of some spicy elements, especially those surrounding about healing, about protection, about especially from diseases, from curses, that you would make pacts, quote unquote, or prayers or appeasements to those evil spirits. And most of the times, those evil spirits were again portrayed as women, as Dobilni, for example, the spreaders of sickness were Dobilni, the sisterhood, or the evil, the demons that dwelled in the underworld. Many of them were portrayed as female or appearing as beautiful women. Even those negative aspects and demonic aspects were presented as feminine in the highlands and mountains, that a lot of those mythologies survive the best. Again, it's more patriotic, patriarchal, and to them everything female is again evil, nasty, and demonic. In that culture, we have so many words for witches, of people who curse, who people who commit evil acts to bring curses upon the community and the family. For what? It's really hard to say. Usually, it's explained that they do all this evil to appease their evil overlord, to gain power from them, to gain immortality, magical abilities, some sort of benefit for themselves. They pay with the life of their neighbors and their family members. And then, of course, comes in Christianity. I rambled so much. Thank you if you are actually managing to listen to me up until now. Now we finally get to Christianity, Middle Ages, and more typical perception of witchcraft. So, in Middle Ages, where Christianity comes in, again, it's more preoccupied with hard lines: good, evil, hell, heaven, angel, devil, nothing in between. And of course, everything is only good that is part of the church, and everything that is not part of the church and is not sanctioned by the church is evil. So, in this framework and in this understanding, everything that was surviving from the previous faiths, especially about nature, about spirituality, about appeasing the local the household gods and ancient relatives, and appeasing the spirits of your ancestors, all the local gods, all of that goes into the box of evil devil shit. And everything that is Christian and comes from the outside and is part of the religious hierarchy, that is good. But also, it is very important to remember, when Christianity is spreading into especially early cultures such as Georgia and Armenia and the Caucasus, where we're one of the first Christian converts, it's not as powerful, and the frameworks of the church isn't formed. So a lot of old pagan rituals and old pagan beliefs kind of seep in and fuse into Christianity, and that is same in other parts of Europe. And all those nature spirits, fays, fairies, and paris, and all those creatures now become not fallen angels, not heavenly angels, but angels that didn't participate in the war, so they weren't banished into the underworld and they weren't let back into heaven. So they remain on earth as nature spirits. That's the Christian explanation for all the fae and fairy and nature stuff. But as time goes by and as church becomes more powerful and as they try to push away and push out every folk belief and every folk medicine and folk tradition. They're now cracking down on folk beliefs much harder. And now, when previously they were like in tandem, working together, and for example, a local witch can also go to the church and pray together with the community, and the community would come to the local witch for her medicine, and then they would go to church to pray to God for the medicine to work. That's like symbiotic relationship that they had. Church really didn't recognize them, but the people did. So like people would often go to first ask their witch for help, and then they would ask the priest for help, and decide which was the better option, which was the easier to do. So in western part of the world, especially when Protestantism came and during Enlightenment, there was a heavier push against those pagan beliefs, against those like heretical ideas and witch hunting, and of course, Catholic Church isn't to be ignored. Catholic Church, of course, had crusades and inquisitions, but those were more for heresy, not for witchcraft. Witchcraft is it's like Catholic Church didn't really really recognize the existence of witches, but Italy and that part of the world was filled with people who used spellcraft and magic to fight for God and Jesus Christ. There are plenty of stories of good witches and good werewolves who go into the astral plane to fight all the bad witches. And there's like, no, when the Inquisition comes and when the witch finders come, be like, you are set to turn into animals and go into the spirit world to meet with witches. But no, I'm there to fight the evil witches. I'm one of the good ones. I'm the light witch, not the dark witch. And but again, to Inquisition, to the to the hammer of witches, everything is a nail. For Malus Maleficarum. Everything was a witch, everything was evil, everything that didn't follow the church's doctrine was stamped out and punished. And a lot of times the good witches who were public, they were the ones who were punished. So the bad ones who were secretive, who met in the woods with masks and costumes and didn't really show themselves, they weren't really punished as much as the ones who were forthcoming with their witchcraft. Similar thing happened in Georgia as well, but again, to mention, Eastern Orthodoxy, we didn't do crusades, we didn't do church mandated witch hunting. There were plenty of exorcisms and blessings and many other things. We had our own version, and there were witch hunts, but they were done by local communities and family members, and usually like it was settled in the village and in the community. It wasn't like nationwide panic. And there are a lot of stories surviving of people called mesmenai, who were listeners of witches. Basically, they would gather and find witches' covens and witches' Sabbath, the Black Sabbath. In the Georgian, it's called Kudiant. Wait, what is it? Kudiant Tsukhari. Kudiant Tsukhari is similar idea to the Black Sabbath, where witches gather and do their evil witchcraft, make their lotions and poisons that give them magical abilities to fly. And you know how witches fly on broomsticks, right? In Georgia, they fly on satznecheli, which is like really large wooden oak where people press wine, like the big old boat of wine pressing. This is such a good Georgian thing. Of course, many of them still fly on cats and wolves and coyotes and brooms and everything else, but also in the text it's mentioned that they also fly in satznacheli, the wine pressing thing. Imagine it's like a bus for witches, like multiple witches sit down and like we need two people and we're flying out, you know. Origats is the Gaudiort. Like a long bus of witches coming into the witches coven to like some of them don't have enough oil and like everyone gets to share the drive and some young witches cannot fly, they don't have their flying license, so like one witch like puts on the goggles and like flies with their like long boat and flies down. All right, all right. So Mesmenai were people who would go out during the witches' gathering, the Black Sabbath, and they would hide and listen to the evil plans of the witches. That's really interesting. That they would also like do some salt or ash or some sort of a spiritual protection circle, so the witches couldn't come in and curse them. But so they couldn't touch them physically. So they would turn into monsters, bears, and bring like illusions and other horrible things. And if you got scared, you would be cursed and you would die. So you would have to like keep your composure while the witches are trying to scare you, and after they're like, okay, we can scare him, we might as well continue with our witchcraft. And that person becomes the like tattletale of witches, basically. He would listen, and sometimes they would hide like underground or in some sort of a hole to listen to the witches gathering, and they would like plan who's going to curse which family, what horrible thing is going to happen to whom. So everything bad that happens in the village was planned in that on that day, and this person can hear that information, can write that down, and then tell that, she's planning to curse you, she's actually a witch, she's actually a witch. And then they would have like a impromptu inquisition where they would torture some of these people. And the fun thing is that if your witchiness is revealed, you are no longer considered a threat. You're like, your witch card is denied. Or some version, it's like, if people find out that you're a witch, other witches will kill you, so you don't reveal their identities. But there are also other stories where witches willingly reveal themselves to be a Kudiani, the tailed one, and they will disclose that information, and they also lose their power. Another interesting detail through that Inquisition process is that, again, water dunking is universal. Comes back from the Sumerian or Babylonian period. Water dunking is universal, but in some versions, like witch's float, your typical like how to find witch. If she survives drowning, she's a witch. If she died, she must have been the good one. There is another, like in Hammurabi's text, if I'm not mistaken, if she drowned, she's a witch, and if she survived, she's a good one, because the river wouldn't kill a good person. So that's another twist. So we might have been doing the witches test completely differently, but Georgian version of this is completely unique. Again, someone might write in the comments, we have the similar thing in like Bratislava or somewhere, I don't know. Witches, as I mentioned, one of their names is Kudiani, the tailed ones that are famously shapeshifters. They have an invisible tail that can be felt or can be touched, or usually can be revealed by putting them in the water, and they would wiggle their tails in the water, and it will be like the size of a finger. So I'm gonna make a terrible joke. If you're doing a witch's test, do not fart, so nobody would think you're making that bubbles with your tail. Okay, I apologize for the terrible joke, but it's such an interesting idea of like you having an invisible tail and only way to discover it through the water. Like, it kind of makes more sense if you think about it. Like, throwing someone in the water and making them drown, and if they don't drown, then you burn them. It's stupid. Like you would lose in both ways. If she drowns, she was actually a good person and you killed an innocent person. If she survives, she's a witch and you still have to burn her. But if you put like her butt in the water and she wiggles her invisible tail, now it's a simple process, and you don't actually need to burn her. We didn't burn witches. The fact that they were revealed already like disqualified them as witches, but not. It's again, every region has its own versions. There are many different types of witches. There are those who are specifically communing with the wild and forest. There are specifically the ones who work with the underworld. There are those who connect to the old pagan gods and spirits who are like seers, and there are many different versions. um, okay, we mentioned this, slowly trying to wrap up this long video. I want to know, I've been reading and studying for this video for a month basically. It took me a really long time to gather information, and I don't want to forget anything cool information that I gathered. Okay, I've mentioned good witches before. There are some who are actually good and might be beneficial to society, but again, to the church, everyone who practices magic is evil. And okay, let's finally talk about the evil ones, the bad witches who are actually canonically evil and do not deserve our sympathy. Those witches, Jasni, or like many different names that I mentioned, they work for a figure. Okay, there are two figures. I'll mention both of them. One is the king, and the other is the queen of witches, basically. But they have, I don't think they have direct connection. One is called Doria Schevelim, who is finally getting to the demonic and evil horned creatures, who is a giant one-eyed cyclops that has an eye on its face. And Doria Scheveli is a powerful and evil creature that dwells in a Doria's mountain caverns. Again, in the mount, gods dwell in the mountains, and the demons and the underworld and evil creatures dwell in the caverns, in the gorges, and in the cracks through the mountains and in the underworld sections, basically. So there is one place, Doria's place, and Doria's Cheveli. Chevi is basically a gorge or a cavern in the mountains, and he dwells there. And this evil creature commands the army of witches, werewolves, and other monstrosities to go out and cause evil. And he bestows magical gifts and magical properties to others. And sometimes he journeys out of his domain to participate in those like witches' Sabbaths. Again, I wanted to mention before I finish, witches' Sabbaths or Kudianta Tsukhari is usually said to be on a day or a few days before Easter. So like Holy Friday or before Holy Friday. So, but other versions and other stories claim it to be in the early autumn or mid-autumn or like Halloween period. So Halloween is of course associated with witches, and similar holidays exist here, which is Ainoba and Berik Aoba. I've talked about these stories many times before, that Halloween, similar holidays and similar festivities of masquerades, of turning yourself into like ghoulish creatures, also takes place during winter, like not winter, autumn and spring. That's the two holidays. Like Berik Aoba is spring holiday, the revival of nature and bringing back of life, and Ainoba is the autumn holiday. And Witches' Day is also similarly. There is like autumn Witches' Day and spring Witches' Day. Depends on cultures, depends on periods, because the cycle of life and cycle of nature is connected to the bringing of life and death of life. So spring, summer, and autumn half, like when it's warm and life is brewing, It's considered the domain of God and domain of life and domain of fertility spirits. And the period of winter, late autumn, early spring, that period is the domain of evil spirits, witches, and the beasts of the underworld. This connects to the ancient, like pagan rituals of like life and death and rebirth, and more Christian ideas of like hell and heaven's battle. Like heaven is associated with light, and hell and the darkness with night. So like in winter it's more night, in summer it's more day. So that's the cosmic battle continuing. So Doria's Heavily similarly appears during autumn, this period, and leads the parade of witches to the Black Sabbath, as I mentioned, similarly. Qudiyanta Tzukhare, as I mentioned. Khibel Qudiyanta Tzukhare. And again, similarly, before Easter or during April, different or May or April, we have a similar tradition of witches coven. And again, some people go in, listen to what are those evil witches planning, and they bring that information back to us. But they are also considered to be like spooky and live in outskirts of society. Okay, going back to the Doria Skeval, the one-eyed cyclopean demon king of the parade of witches, the carnival of witches, and he bestows power to them. He's like this ancient cyclopean god, probably of the underworld, that has been influenced with more like Christian demonic elements, and it became like this more like a demonic figure, and parallel to Lucifer appearing to the witches at the Black Sabbath and giving them their demonic pact. But there is another figure called Rokapi. I've mentioned her in my previous video about bound gods. Technically, the next video was supposed to be about Amirani, but I couldn't finish it. So I'm considering this link as the part of the trilogy. Rokapi is a super old hag that is chained to a magical pole, and she dwells in the underground caves, underworld, and witches are supposed to serve her. The witches and all the like Mzakvari. Mzakvari are the evilest of evil witches. So Kudiani are sometimes also associated with her, but Kudiani are again more nature and wilderness associations, like shape-shifting witches of nature, of wild, and the connection between the battle of civilization and wilderness. But Mzakvarni are the evildoers, the malicious ones, who are specifically servants of the evil witch that is chained in the underworld. And she sends all those witches out to society. Let's put this evil mask down. She sets her servants out into the society to cause as much harm, as much mischief, and as much pain as possible. And during her Sabbath and during her gathering, all the witches come and tell her stories of all the bad things they did, all the sacrifices, all the evil things they did, and they present her livers and hearts they stole from humans. And animals, also they target animals, blight fields, curse. So everything bad that might happen to you, you stabbing a toe, your door falling off, I don't know, your cow dying from disease, everything was done by an evil witch serving this like Rokapi. And she herself delights in the suffering of humanity and eats the hearts and the livers and the sorrow and suffering brought to her. And often the main target of her delight are little children. And one of the most difficult parts of the initiation of this Mzakvari is sacrificing their child. And a lot of stories, like written down stories, are of children of those witches who somehow survive their mothers trying to kill them somehow. you do with a curse or with like complicated uh, plans of. It's really complicated to tell. I've read the whole book about every crazy encounter they could have had. So this figure Rokapi is an ancient malicious goddess, basically, that sustains her life through suffering of humanity. And I believe, this is my personal theory, it goes back to the mountain perception that everything evil comes from females and everything evil is associated with feminine power. There is a story of father creator and mother creator that created the world, father that mother that made the world, and father that shaped the world and brought it to order. But they became in conflict, and everything good that father would make, mother would make the opposite. So father made humans, mother made the giant ogres who ate humans. Father made god's sons, angelic heroes. Mother made Kaji, the underworld witches, and monsters. And uh, servants of God are usually men, and servants of this evil mother who dwells in the underworld are usually witches. And that's where a lot of those witchcraft associated with women and evil also stems from. This could be again influence of Zoroastrianism, again with like Ariman and Ahura Mazda, again the depictions of chaos and good. But similar stories are actually found in Japan, where Izanagi and Izanami, mother and father of all the gods of Japanese mythology, when they came, the mother passed away, giving birth to the fire god, and she now dwells in the underworld and cursed humanity and cursed everything above the world to die and suffer from her underworld children. So it's an ancient motif. Again, Georgia has both patriarchal roots and matriarchal roots. So I think it's like lowland worshipped mothers and highland worshipped fathers, and that's where the conflict comes in. Whew, I've told a lot of crazy stories. Okay, one final one. My favorite one actually is a ritual associated with the witches' Sabbath. Again, Mzakwar, Kaj, Udian, so many names of their Greoba or meeting or whatever it's called. The story is, what do you do to protect yourself from those evil witches? You have a bigger and better party. So witches are going out in the woods and cursed places and abandoned graveyards and those parts to do their evil witchcraft. Then you're going to have a better party with bigger fire and better dancing and better food and better entertainment to counter their influence and their power. Also to know who is here and who is missing. Like if you're with our party, that means you're not attending their party. And this party has many names, but most commonly it's called Chiakokonobana. I know I'm throwing you a crazy Georgian words in this video, but Chiakokonobana is my favorite holiday and favorite tradition. Unfortunately, it's not as practiced as much right now, but I will keep the tradition going. Well, it had many other rituals and many other traditions, but surviving version that we still practice is making a big bonfire that you have to jump over so that the witches and evil spirits that are tracking you will lose their tail that they have pinned to you or something like that. The shadow that is following you will not be able to cross the fire and you will be free of the evil spirit. This similar tradition is all over Eastern Europe and all over Central, other parts as well. I think in Western Europe as well. It's an ancient ritual that goes back thousands and thousands of years. And I believe it's one of the most fun I had as a child. sneaking out and kids gathering a bunch of firewood and jumping over, and some of us would slip and fall into the fire, and we would laugh. And it might sound fucked up, but it was really fun. I really enjoyed those memories. So now I'm thinking like, did I miss anything? Oh, one other fun fact: Rokapi's other name is Rompapi. Rompapi, I think it's actually making fun of Rome, Pope in Rome. You know, we don't have popes; we have patriarchs. Uh, our leader of the Georgian Orthodox Church is called a patriarch, but Rokap is other name being a Rome Papi and the leader of evil witches. It's really funny to me, the Mzakvari. But one other thing is that I'm trying to like differentiate. This word means this word is that. Usually, all the names of witches and spirit mediums and all of that were mixed and matched without any real care. But at the end, finally, at the end, I really want to say this part. In we see a large revival movement of paganism, of old traditions, of witchcraft, of like neo pagans, neo witches, all these like TikTok witches, and all the jazz is becoming more and more popular. I have mixed feelings about it because, of course, I really love culture and I want to participate and revive all the old cultures and traditions that I love. But I also, as a still, uh, I might not look like one right now, but I am still a devoted Orthodox Christian. I still, be careful, guys. The being the even the phase and the spirits of nature and in the middle of the hierarchy, they aren't the good ones. Being neutral doesn't mean they're on your side. They're on their side, and nature is not a lovey-dovey and kind thing. It can be really harsh and really dangerous. So be careful and keep in mind that what you're practicing is not the original faith. It's more woo-woo, hippie, modern reinterpretation of it. And just to mention this as well, in Eastern Europe, in other parts of the world, of course, there are like spirit mediums and witches and those stuff. You've noticed that a lot of the stereotype of those like card readers or like mediums and all that jazz are more like stereotypically old Eastern European women. Again, there are of course surviving traditions in Western Europe, in Americas, and other parts of the world. Bruja comes to mind from the Americas as well. Many of those like spiritualism, witchcraft, witch doctors, like folk healing, all those stuff mixed together and created like modern things like mixing, matching, all of this stuff is forgotten, revived, revitalized, all of the jazz. And the presence of witches is really, really high in Eastern Europe, but they don't seem to like actually take authentic old school witchcraft that seriously as much. So it's like a mix of like modern esotericism, Olga Blavatsky or whatever her name is, theosophy influence, other more like 18th, 19th, 20th century spiritualism influence. But some of them still keep a lot of those old traditions alive, and I don't dabble in those kind of stuff. Again, good Christian boy. Wolf for Christ, werewolf for Christ, right here. There, I really want to talk more about like werewolf of Christ, like Christian werewolves and those like using those pagan traditions in more uh, good Christian ways. But I don't know. Be careful. Be mindful. Remember all traditions, but remember the safeguards they also carried as well. And please, nobody curse me for revealing the dark secrets that have been hidden for centuries. I don't know. I'm stretching the video out as long as and even longer. thank you if you actually managed to listen all these crazy ramblings until now. I'll try to upload much better. Thank you, thank you to my Patreon supporters. Please watch my other videos and support the channel as much as you can. If you can donate, and if you can just leave a like and comment, that would be really great. Thank you and take care.